Jungian shadow is not your evil side. It actually contains some of your best qualities. The psychological concept of the shadow, as defined by the great psychologist Carl Jung, has been massively popular for the last couple of decades. But there is one problem. Most people view or think of the shadow as their dark or evil side. And therefore, the concept or the idea of the shadow integration, that is the process of integrating your shadow so that you can become a well-rounded, whole, integrated, individuated person, that process is viewed as the process of just embracing your darkness, embracing your evil side. And that's a mistake. Although the shadow can and often does contain parts of ourselves that can be viewed as potentially negative and destructive, that's not the entirety of the shadow. So yes, we can say that part of your shadow is, let's say, someone's tendency for aggression or someone's quick temper. That can be a part of the shadow. But shadow is way more interesting than being just your dark or evil side. Carl Jung said that our biggest shadow issue is not that we are evil. Our biggest shadow issue is that we are living lives that are too small. Now, what does it mean to live a small life? It means to live a life that is guided and defined by fears and defenses, psychological defenses, defenses from those fears. And why would you live a life? How would you end up with a life defined and guided by fears and defenses? Because your ego is protecting you, or at least it thinks that it's protecting you. Now, it's important to mention, because certain Eastern traditions view the ego as something that needs to be removed, eliminated, dissolved. Jungian psychology doesn't view ego like that. Ego is a necessary and important part of the individual, but it's also important for the ego not to think, if we can put it like that, or for the ego not to act as the entirety of the individual. And that is a flaw, and a very frequent flaw of the ego, to act as if it's the totality of the individual. It isn't. It's just the tip of the iceberg. But one thing about the ego that is interesting and very relevant in the context of the Jungian psychology and the shadow talk is that the ego is trying to protect us, or at least it thinks that it's trying to protect us. From what? From danger, from uncertainty, and from death. The ego is the part of the individual that is afraid of death. But not only of physical death, also of psychological death. And now we think of change, evolution, growth of the individual. It requires entering the unknown. And all change, all transformation, all growth, all embarking on the journey into the unknown, all of that involves psychological death, meaning parts of you and parts of your old self and your old life are dying as you are entering the unknown and changing and transforming into a new, higher, greater version of yourself. On the journey of becoming who you can be and who you are supposed to be, you're constantly dying parts of yourself. Your old belief systems, your old behavior patterns, and even your old relationships, part of yourself, are dying. And ego is afraid of death and is trying to protect you from death. And then ego prioritizes certainty, safety, or often the illusion of certainty and safety, especially certainty. Almost always in life, it's the illusion of certainty, not real certainty. Safety, we could say that sometimes we actually can have real safety. But ego prioritizes, let's say, the illusion of certainty, safety, comfort, and status quo, familiarity. And then we end up with this life that is too small. Another way to look at this is that all that is opposite of these fears and defenses, that's this embarking into the unknown, stepping into the unknown, change, embracing challenge, all of that causes anxiety. I talked in many of my videos about anxiety from an existentialist perspective, that is pretty similar to how Jungians would view it. Anxiety is implied in entering the unknown. Anxiety is implied in taking on challenges in life. Existential perspective of anxiety speaks of the dizziness of freedom. You are faced with almost infinite possibilities. And all roads in life that are actually taking you forward are uncertain. And not only every single road being uncertain, it's also the fact that you are not sure which road to take. And all of that is overwhelming and causes this original existential anxiety. So the only way to avoid anxiety is to live a small life. And then we have it, this tension. On one side there is small life, which is constricting, and as we will see, leads to suppressing your best qualities. On the other side, there is anxiety. You have to face and move through anxiety in order to engage in all of these things that will lead to growth. So we could say that in order to avoid anxiety and in order to avoid disrupting the status quo, in order to avoid psychological death, but also in order to avoid being ostracized by the community or being mocked by the community or sticking out too much, to avoid all of these things, we do what? We suppress our highest qualities and capacities. We suppress that in us which is seeking to grow, which is seeking to be expressed and to be different than others, which is seeking to stick out, not for the sake of sticking out, but is seeking to stick out for the sake of being yourself. We suppress our highest and best qualities in order to protect ourselves. But that protection is far from doing ourselves a favor. It's cutting our own wings. And then we see that often our shadow is formed by the suppression of our highest or best or most interesting qualities. Because that's what the shadow is. It's a suppressed part of yourself. Or it's a part of yourself that contains all of these suppressed parts of yourself. And we now realize that only part of the shadow consists of these dark parts that we suppressed. So yes, part of the shadow integration process is about embracing your capacity for aggression. Because let's say you grew up being taught by your parents to be a well-behaved child, then a well-behaved teenager, then you end up being a well-behaved adult, and you are a nice person. And you have been suppressing your capacity because you have, like any other human, a capacity for aggression. But because there was such a strong emphasis, let's say in your upbringing, on an importance or the importance of being kind and polite and having good manners and avoiding conflict, for those reasons you've been suppressing and suppressing and suppressing your capacity for aggression. So we could say that this capacity for aggression that in most people is leading to or does lead to violent behavior and therefore is considered sort of negative, let's say that is part of your shadow. Part of your shadow is or are parts of your shadow are those conventionally negative things. Aggression, anger, things of that sort. However, there is a whole another world in the shadow realm, to put it that way, and that's your creativity, your humor, your ambition. For a lot of people, their ambition is a major part of their shadow. So you have traded these things, these parts of yourself that are seeking to push you in the direction of anxiety, discomfort, challenge, unknown, because growth is on the other side of all of these things. You have traded the qualities that are pushing you in that direction for a small but safe life. And of course, this trade-off didn't happen by you sitting down and looking at the offer and saying, okay, I'm choosing a small life. It happens in parts of ourselves that we are not always aware of. But now you are becoming aware of it. Now you know that your shadow is not your evil or dark side. Your shadow contains some of your best qualities. And then the question is, how do you start re-engaging with those qualities? Because we see that so much of it is just protection from the things that actually you can handle. You can handle being mocked. You can handle being seen. You can handle being different. You are safe. You are safe by doing so. You are safe making a video. You think I always found this enjoyable? You think I always found writing enjoyable? You think I don't sweat sometimes before making a video because I'm nervous about how it's going to come out? You think I haven't had thousands of moments of writing and thinking, what am I doing? Some people are going to see this. Some people are going to see, who am I to expose myself in that way? And maybe be mocked, criticized, ridiculed. It happens to all of us. I'm using an example of writing and speaking to the camera because it's most relevant for me. But whatever it is for you, you are actually safe. And that's one thing that you need to learn. I'm hesitating to say is the most important step, because there are nuances to discuss, and if I'm talking to you one-on-one, there could be some nuances and different things to point out with different people. But let's say something that applies to almost every single person is you need to start learning how to make yourself feel safe. Not to think there is this state of perfect comfort at doing the thing which was previously challenging. That would be a mistake. So when I say learning to make yourself feel safe, don't expect that any of the self-regulation techniques need to bring you to the point where you don't feel any discomfort once you write and share your writing, or you will not feel any discomfort once you turn on the camera. No. The initial bringing down of the arousal, becoming more grounded. And it can start with just one conscious breath. We can do one together right now. You're just going to inhale, not violently. You're going to inhale deeply, but still comfortably. And exhale. And sit with yourself for 5 seconds without the need to scroll in order to forget about the discomfort, or without the need to reach for some food to forget about the discomfort. Let's for a moment forget 5 minutes of self-regulation, or 7 minutes, or 10, or 30 minutes. Let's think about just occasionally stopping and doing one conscious breath, one deep inhale. Let's not even count the seconds. All of that can come later. I do practice all of that. I do teach those things to people. I do advocate for those things. But right now, let's just start spending more time with ourselves, not by blocking out 3 hours in our calendar to spend time with ourselves, although that is sometimes relevant. And also it's relevant to spend time with yourself, to actually block out time with yourself, for yourself in the morning. But now, when I say spending more time with yourself, I'm talking about actually as you're going through the day, spending some of that time with yourself and not being out there projecting into the fear. Spend time with yourself as you are right now. And as strange as it may sound, that is, as I said, one of the fundamental steps of getting in touch with these parts of yourself that have been buried, that have been suppressed, and that have become part of the shadow. Some of those best qualities. Whether it's ambition, whether it's creativity, whether it's maybe specific part of your creativity. Maybe you're a guy who grew up in a conservative environment and you always wanted to dance, and your tendency towards artistic physical movement has been suppressed. Maybe that's part of your shadow, you know? And I understand. That can be as rough as some seemingly way more serious shadow issues. But these ones need to be acknowledged as well. So once again, your shadow, the Jungian shadow that people are so interested in, is not your evil side. It contains some of your best qualities. And you need to realize that those best qualities have been suppressed in order to protect you. But you don't need to be protected from life. You don't need to be protected from change. You don't need to be protected from anxiety. You can pierce through that anxiety. That's what you do with anxiety. You don't eliminate it. Anxiety is not to be eliminated. Anxiety in some cases is to be reduced, and then you pierce through it, or you pierce through it right away. It's not to be medicated away. You don't need to be protected from anxiety, from change, from discomfort. You don't need to be protected from growth. You don't need to be protected from the unknown. Unknown is calling you for a reason. Because parts of you want to grow. And in order for you to grow, in order for you to become who you are supposed to be, who you can be, as Maslow said, who you can be, you must be. In order for you to become who you can and must be, you must go through the unknown. So you don't need to be protected. Shadow has been formed by the mistaken idea that you need so much protection. You don't need protection. You don't need protection. So take one deep breath and pierce through that anxiety and embark on the journey of growth. But besides that one breath, if you want one more very concrete action to take, then really do block out 30 minutes, go on a walk, and ask yourself one question to answer during the walk. What are parts of myself that I have been suppressing because I know they will challenge me to enter the unknown? And that's it, my friends. Enter the unknown. Thank you.